in the last class, where we were talking about recall versus recognition in the context of memory. And I was saying that we were discussing about the ways you have seen recall and recognition in examinations. And you all were right to suggest that a fill in the blanks is like a recall test and MCQ is more like a recognition test. And then I was trying to say, well, there are not just one kinds, but there are multiple kinds of recall tasks one could ask. Here as an example, you can have a serial recall task where order matters, or you have free recall task where you need to recall them in any order, random order. And you can have a queued recall task, which is when I give you one queue and you if I tell you apple, you say S. I tell you dog, you say T. That's a queued recall. So I queue the response based on a certain other certain other thing in the pair. So these are all tuples mathematically, which are essentially a pairs of objects or strings, and you are told one string, you have to give back the other. So there are three kinds of recall tasks, and that's where we stopped. Then we have to look at recognition, and as you might already, this is what we were discussing, somehow the MCQ seems to be simpler or easier to do than fill in the blanks, because recognition typically is easier than recall. But you can have more complex sets, and I wanted to show you a lab experiment of recognition memory, which is something like this. So imagine you need to do a recognition task only with faces. So you will be shown a whole series of faces, and here is an example. There are 3 faces. Or you could do a recognition task with objects, and again here you have a string of objects. Here there are 3 such examples. Or you could do a recognition task with words, and just like before, you have 3 such words on your screen. So I could do a recognition task, or you can do a recognition test, for example, using only faces, or one using only objects, or one using words, only words. Or you could do a recognition task or a test where they're all mixed up. So there is no categories. You would be shown faces and objects and words, and then eventually in the testing phase, I would show you either a face or an object or a word, and you have to say whether you had seen it before. So which of this would be more difficult for people to do? If we do it category wise, only faces, only objects, only words, or we mix and match between objects, which is the more difficult task? These are 2 recognition tasks, one which is category specific and one which is cross category.
Sir, it would be cross category, because then we will have to actually set up a link between the 3 pictures so that we can recognize them, although there is no such solid link that can be established. We will have to focus, and we have to be attentive. We have to give a lot of attention to this task then.
Yeah, sure. I mean, but what makes cross category recognition more difficult? So imagine this way. So think about, you have only MCQs in a test, and you have let's say 2 chapters in the syllabus or 10 chapters in the syllabus, or you have an MCQ where you do an MCQ for only one paper, or you do an MCQ from which you could get questions from, let's say, 3 papers. What makes the later one, which is the mixed one, more difficult? No, think about the mind. So how would you have stored information or encoded information? And now for recognition, you have to recall information. Although it's not really a recall task, but still you do have to recall information to be successful at the recognition task. Right. So this is a simple lab experiment, and I also give you a exam-based scenario. And you are right that when you have only one category, the task is easier, but when you have cross categories or multiple categories, it's complex or more difficult. The question is, why is a task which has multiple categories, why does it become more difficult, even though we do know that recognition tasks are slightly easier to do?
So what do you mean by multiple category for? I
Ah, so
didn't get that.
yeah, so I mean, imagine I show you all the 9 things in the training phase, and in the testing phase, I show you any of these, and you have to say whether you had seen them before or not. But there could be many other things which you did not see, and you have to say that I have not seen it. So your correct answer is when you are recognizing correctly, and your correct answer also is when you're recognizing that you had not seen it before. So when I say multi-category, I mean all these 9 things that you see are part of your training. Whereas when I say single category, I mean only these 3, or even if you have 9 objects, all the 9 will be faces, or all the 9 will be objects, or all the 9 will be words. That is single category.
So I think our brain finds it easier to recall things from the same group or category.
Okay, that's true. That's the result. We have to explain. Yeah, and you are right. Most of the time, that's indeed the case. But there are catches though, which I'll show you in a while. But in general, that's the intuition that if you have, if you if you memorize, or if you remember, or if you encode information in one category, it's easier to encode them compared to when you're encoding information across multiple categories. So is the problem really at the encoding stage? Or you could also think, well, encoding, it does not matter, but when I have to recognize, that is where the difficulty is, because then I have to recognize across multiple categories.
So it
But still
also
you have,
depend on the, it
yeah,
also depend on the thing to think. If we want to recognize the some member or a sub human being, we want to recognize with the help of the face. But if there is a thing like the scissor or telephone, it will be the recognized by its whole image, not by
yeah.
name or something. And the
Well, you can't name the faces either, right? So you don't know, or you might not know whose faces they are. So it's not language issue here. In fact, you still have names for the objects, but you might not even have names for the faces.
Sir, it is difficult across cross category because suppose we were given mixed images of faces and these objects, we would have to then recognize the faces based on their features like presence of eyes, the structure of nose, the proportions between the lips. So this might be a part of a different section of the brain. But for recognizing the objects like scissor, telephone, we might be using Gion theory, where we divide the objects into various small Gion shapes and try to recognize. So these are two different categories according to our mind. So the mind will have to move from um, one part of the mind to other to and again and again. So this might make the task difficult.
Okay, so yeah, I like your the way you are thinking, but two corrections. First, all faces are not. I mean, if you think of face as a form, all face recognitions are not based on individual features, because individual feature based recognition, first of all, is computationally very intensive. Computers do that, but humans don't. And the behavioral example of that is, um, where is that face gone? Oh, it's not here. So we did look at faces where you would have a beard and you have not have a beard, and still you recognize that it's the same face. And the reason, or the way humans do it, and they can do it very fast. So typically face recognition can be done in a few milliseconds, which is, I don't know, about 1/10 of a second or so, um, or maybe a little more, 1/5 of a second perhaps. But you can't imagine how difficult that will be if you are really recognizing all the different spatial features of a face. Rather, the idea is we understand face as a composite whole, more like a gestalt, overall stimuli, not as made up of individual parts. If it would be so, then we would not really make a mistake if you have or don't have beard, or you keep or don't keep mustache, or you put and don't put makeup. But the idea that we are able to do it in a very small instant of time shows that there is some generic overall shape recognition we do about the face overall as a face, as one single composite whole. However, at times, if required and if time permits, then we can also do feature-based recognition and eventually realize, oh, it is the same face. So the first trump that we will have can be eventually mitigated, but it takes more amount of time or more computational resources. So um, face recognition happens both as a whole and as parts, not only as parts. That's one quick rejoinder. The second is, whenever you talk about theories, like you talked about Guion theory, yes, you are right. Probably Guion theory can explain how we do object recognition, and we did use such objects in Guion theory. So very good, smart thinking in that. But also realize that these theories are all theories, right? So there are 4 different theories. Now, the brain or the mind, whatever, cannot move from one part to the other. Mind is mind. The theory is somehow about the mind. The theory might be wrong, or the theory might be right. The theory might be weak, or the theory might be narrow or broad, whatever. But those are characteristics of the theory. The mind is doing what it's doing. It is basically recognizing faces and words and objects. It is the theorists, the psychologist's responsibility to explain that functioning. Mind itself will not say, okay, let me pick up Guion theory and use Guion theory on this. Now let me pick up feature analysis theory and use feature analysis on that. That's not how the mind will work. The mind will work the way it's working already. It is the theorists, and most of the time in psychology, I think we have a whole bunch of very vague theorists. The theories do not really spell in intricate detail of how exactly the function happens, both in experimental psychology and social psychology, and even worse in positive psychology, actually. So the kinds of terms that are used are not very well defined in the theories. That leads it to multiple representations, and also sometimes you don't really know exactly what are the um, mechanisms or what are the computations behind it. But that's the problem with the theory. That doesn't mean there is a problem with the mind or the way that we operate, because we are able to do this task very well. It requires more clearer and in-depth theory building. So the second part that you said, that mind is going to move from this to that, is wrong, because mind is mind. If none of these theories are good enough, then we should throw all of them and we should go for a 5th one. Right? So for example, Guion theory, if it's a theory, it should be able to explain all the kinds of recognition memory. So it should be able to explain face and objects and words. Then it's a strong theory. If it is not, then it is not a strong theory, which is fine. If it's a narrow theory, that's also fine. But it has to spell out on its own what exactly is it able to explain, and how is it coming about. So yeah, so these 2 things I just wanted to point out, so that there is clarity um, and clearness of thinking about it. But is the sense that for different kinds of recognition, we are using different kinds of algorithms in the brain? Is that what you were trying to say?
Yes, I was trying to say that different parts of the brain are involved in different type of tasks. So
That's
uh,
true. Yeah, so that we have a neuroscientific evidence for, right? So I mean, that's easy actually to test. So all you have to do is you have to tell people to do a recognition memory task while you're measuring their brain activity, right? And what you would do is, you would do one task where you will show only faces, you will do another task where you will show only objects, and you will do a third task when you will show only words, and a fourth task when you will mix them up. And you will compare brain activity for four different tasks, and from there you will understand which parts of the brain are most active for faces. Most, not only, because brain is a highly interconnected organ. So it is not the case, and this is again a myth people have, that this area is responsible for this kind of a task. That's not true anymore. Certain areas are more responsible for certain kinds of tasks, but that doesn't mean other areas are not providing input. when that task is happening. So what neuroscientific evidence, typically you would do an fMRI for that, for example, will show you that there are certain brain areas that are most responsive or most active when you are doing the face recognition task, certain others when you are doing the object recognition, and certain others when you're doing the word recognition, and probably a whole bunch and mix and match of things when you're doing the overall thing. So yes, that part is very right, that the brain, if you look at the brain itself, you would have different areas of the brain that will be more active versus another for certain kinds of recognition compared to certain other kinds. But does that say why mixed categorization makes it experientially difficult to do? Or do we need something more? So moving in right direction, go on. Let's hear some other additional thoughts to this. Specifically, I think now it's time that I will request a couple of TAs to randomly ask people to talk in the class, because I have consistently been observing that there's a small set of people who are actively responding, and it's nice to hear diverse opinions. So it's very good if many other people also say. There's no right and wrong, guys. So just feel free, raise your hand and go ahead and speak up. There's no problem. There's no consequences. But we
Sir,
want variety.
I have a question. The recognizing by the name is just, it is not the recall condition, or it will be the recognition. Recalling by name.
There is no name. So in the recognition memory task, the way is it's all visual. So you will be shown 9 different objects, and then in the testing phase that you will be shown another object or another slide, and you have to say whether you saw the slide before or you did not see the slide before. Now the question that I'm asking is, if that slide, if during the training phase we would use only faces, and I would ask you to do a recognition task only on faces or only on objects, would that be easier? Or if you show all of them and then I'd ask you to do the recognition task, will that be more easier? Well, people say that the second one is more difficult, and that we have settled. It is indeed more difficult, probably. I'd rather more probability that it's indeed more difficult for many people. What we are trying to now understand is what exactly makes it difficult. So one idea is that there are multiple brain areas involved when you are learning different kinds of things, and also when you are asked to recognize, but that recognition slide can come from any different categories, then probably there is more amount of brain involvement. My question is, does that explain why it is indeed experientially more difficult to do a task when you have multiple things that, from which you could be asked to recognize, versus only one category of things from where you would be asked to recognize? Now, just to get back to the core of the discussion.
So, so I think that when we have different categories of objects to be recognized, we have different points to concentrate on. Like for a face, I need to concentrate on the eyes, nose, and the mouth. And for an object, maybe the overall appearance of the object matters to me. And for the word, I need to first read it, and then I should know that vocabulary, and then I should relate it with that word, something like that. So the way of recognizing those objects is different, and maybe that takes more time. When we are used to recognizing a same category of object, it's a bit faster.
Okay, very good. So at what stage is the problem then? Is it at encoding, or is it at storage, or is it at recall?
So I think both encoding as well as decoding.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, you have hit a very right point. Um, so if you have to encode different kinds of things, take your real life example. So imagine a day when you would study only one subject. Okay, currently the way most timetables are, we we schedule multiple subjects or multiple papers in the same day. You could have a different model of education where you could schedule one paper or one subject on one day. Which one do you think would be more beneficial for people to assimilate? Assimilate means encode information.
Single paper on single day.
Any reason why? Same reason or something else?
Sir, a similar one, because our mind gets used to store a similar kind of information that is related to a particular subject. When multiple subjects are given on the same day, then it actually excites our mind, because our mind has to work more than previous tasks, because different parts of the brain are involved for storing particular information of a subject. So that actually is helpful for our brain, but it becomes we actually feel that it is a tough task.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Any other friends of yours in the class who would want to share their thoughts on this? This is a very close to heart discussion, I believe, for many people.
I think, yeah, in the case that there is only a single subject, that might should be easier, because when we study the same subject, often it happens like even if we are studying a chapter that comes later, that knowledge is somehow related very closely to the previous knowledge in that same subject. So the memory that we might possess earlier will also be involved, and it will just reinforce itself. Maybe it could be that that same things in the same category, when we work on them, then they reinforce the earlier memory of that same thing.
Yeah, another very important point. So the learning itself is not independent, right? So you are essentially enlarging. In neural network terms, you are building a network of concepts, and it's easier to build up the network when you add concepts which are already you have nodes for. Yeah, go ahead. Somebody else?
So, question.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm here.
I have one question. Like we person by the name. Like we give a person a name. Like for me, my name is Ashish, and for after seeing my face, everyone knows this is Ashish and this is his face. But we are putting two types of things together, like the face and a name. But
Mhm.
in this case, we don't feel any difficult. So how is it so?
So you are saying if we would name these three people, then the task would be easier?
Yes, sir. But here, like we have three categories here in the given picture,
Mhm.
like some object and some kind of name and this person.
Mhm.
And if like in our real world, we name a person by its name, but
Mhm.
it will be more easier for us to learn the face and the name of the person. But in this not able to learn easier way.
Yeah, I mean, see,
Sir,
this is.
I think that
Yeah.
it is easier to remember some image when we can associate it with a word which already we have previously associated with a archetypal image of some sort. Like a scissor, the word scissor is already in our mind. We can see that scissor in a sense.
Mhm.
So, and like if we know famous person's name, and we'll know that person's name associated with his image. So if we could like use a shortcut trick or some sort, like one of these faces, if we associate it, like it looks similar to some famous person's face. So if we try to just force ourselves to use that name in it to just remember this face, maybe it will be easier to remember the face later on when we see it, that we might just remember it similar to that face.
Yeah. So do you think it is similar to this example that I showed about a tuple? So here these letters are things that we don't know. These are random. So the faces pictures are random, but you already have a name that you can associate with this random picture, right? So that automatically, if I give you the name, you remember the picture, or if I give you the picture, you remember the name. So that's how you essentially have more inputs to your memory system. If you think about it computationally, you essentially have one node and you have more than two edges that is feeding to the node. So you can take any of these edges and still you reach the same node. So automatically the probability of you being able to recognize or even recollect goes higher up. Yes, that's true. In fact, that's why these kinds of faces become difficult. However, people are able to do it, and here is one example of how people do this thing. This is a slightly more difficult example of a recognition memory task with faces. This person is um, not a famous person. In fact, most of these studies are done by clicking pictures of random people, many a times college undergrads like you all. So nobody knows each other, especially if it's a big university. So in the experiment, and these people have done both by doing a behavioral task only on a computer and doing EEG on that or doing fMRI on that to look at brain responses while people do these tasks. But the typical task is something like this. You first have a viewing phase where you are shown these three pictures, which are essentially the same face from different angles. And this again goes this against the idea that you remember or recognize faces based on features. If you would, then changing the angles of the faces changes the features, and you would not be able to recognize the same face if you turn or rotate the face by a certain angle. But we are very good at it. In fact, even if you turn the face with a large angle, still we are able to recognize the face. That is, people have used that to argue that the possibility that the face we see the face as a whole and not as individual parts, specifically when we are deciding very quickly. Anyway, so beyond that, we have a viewing phase. So you first view this, and then you have a forced choice to, well, this is not just only one phase, but even if it is one phase, imagine this takes about 1 second. So I show you this and then this and then this by showing the rotation. And then the task is, which phase did you just view? This is the forced choice recognition phase, because you have to make a choice. You cannot say nothing. I have to choose between 1, 2, and 3, signifying which is the face that you just saw. And here you would note that if the angle matches, then the emotion matches or both matches. If there is little or no change to the face, then people are able to recognize it much faster and correctly. But if you change any of that, then the recognition itself goes down, which is a counter to saying that we see the faces as a whole, because if that's the case, then it should not really go down. That's why I was, while responding previously, I said we are doing both for faces. We do have a holistic idea of a face or specific faces, but we also do pattern recognition, which is the bottom-up approach to, to look at individual parts of a face. But this is how typically this task is done. I just wanted to show you how it's really implemented when people study this. No names, completely visual task, visual perception task. If you remember our classes on perception or form perception, this is a classic example of form perception. Here the form is the face, but it can be anything, human face. And the reason why only face is shown and hair and all are not shown is to remove any other cue apart from only the face. And that's typical in most face-based perceptual studies. But the important point to note here is, which is the correct answer according to you? And how would you be able to say that? So imagine if you do this task, then what would your answer be? Is it 1, 2, or 3?
Sir, I have a question.
Question? Okay, yeah, hear your question first.
Sir, related to previous one, that we are saying that if we knew that person by the name or such thing, so we can recognize easily. But sir, in that case, things might also be intermixed. Like in the previous page, we are showing the picture and objects. Suppose if we are asked to recognize the words that we are shown, and in this word, let's suppose if there is also elephant and we have shown the elephant, then these two might affect each other.
Yes.
Like if the name, that things affect each other.
Yeah. And
So
can you explain why that could be the case, or how probably is knowledge represented in our brains, which is why what you're saying, you're absolutely right. If we have a picture of a elephant and we have the word elephant, or if we have either of them, but if we would have both, then it will make the task more difficult because we will mix things up in our head. That's very right. Could you hypothesize or theorize how probably are things represented in our brains, which is what makes it confusing when we both have elephant written as a word and elephant picture shown?
sir, when we recognize something, then we recognize that thing by two things. First one is that its image, and the second one, I mean, it's like its spelling or something. That if suppose if in the picture we have seen like a planet, a Jupiter, then immediately in my mind I will recognize that it's a Jupiter. With its spelling also. If I has to recognize again these things, so then this might be confusing.
Yeah. So the reason I was asking why it makes it confusing is that we have in our brain what people call a semantic network. SCAMANTIC. Semantic means the the meaning of semantics is meaning. So semantic network means it's a knowledge network in your head. This is computational, by the way. You can't find it in your brain. That's why it's at an abstract mind level or a computational level. But you have these different concepts. So elephant is a concept. A concept, technically, and there's a philosophical debate about it, what does it constitute? So some people think concept itself is completely abstract. We have other things that lead to the concept. So elephant is a word that points to the concept. Elephant picture or prototypes of elephants that comes to your head, or exemplars or examples of elephants that you have seen, all point to the abstract concept called elephant. Certain characteristics again point to the abstract category called elephant. But elephant as a category, as a concept, is abstract in nature. We are representing the abstract concept using different kinds of visual forms, or linguistic forms, also auditory forms. You can also say, oh, this is the elephant sound, for example, right? So if that's the case, then it makes it probable that if you have multiple representations about one thing, you are pretty sure that elephant occurred, but probably you're not sure whether you saw a picture of an elephant or you saw a word of depicting elephant. That is why this kind of task makes it more difficult, because you have to think of how knowledge is stored in our head, right? I mean, elephant, of course, is an easy example. Now think about the amount of knowledge that is going to be stored or is being stored while you are at IIT. Every single paper, every single semester, maybe every single class, you are bombarded with concepts. And some of the concepts have to be long term, or they are typically long term, right? Some of them are short term. You forget about it after the class, or you forget about it after the semester, but we don't forget everything. We do carry on some amount of knowledge after college, irrespective of wherever we end up working in. So till today, right now, as we speak, I can still remember some of the concepts from my engineering course that I took during my undergrad education, although I don't do engineering at all anymore. But I did undergrad in engineering. I still remember that very vividly, and that is probably going to be true for many others of you. So there is really no goal, there is no motivation, but still knowledge remains. There are also different episodes that happen in our life during college, and we remain or remember that episode without really being a goal to remember it. So, linking back to the discussion we were having in the previous class, but how are we able to remember it? So that is how, that is when we have to think of the representation of knowledge. Whatever we learn, whatever is stored in our memory, how are they stored in memory? What is its representational form? And there, one example is this semantic network. You have abstract concepts, multiple things feeding into that concept, but it's not a single node, because that concept itself will be linked to some other concept. Say, for example, electron is a concept that gets linked to electricity, that gets related to switch, that gets related to semiconductors, that gets related to wires, that gets related also sometimes to color, like blue, red, green for the coding, linked to earth and whatnot. I mean, that, you know, if you think about it, we really have a very large graph consisting of multiple nodes as concepts interrelated with many other concepts. And each of these things will have different representations. Sometimes it is pictorial, sometimes it is linguistic, sometimes it is auditory, sometimes it is tactile. Sometimes you can't even say, how was the food? You remember the taste of the food. You don't really have a word for that food or the word for the taste of that food even. But taste is something which is, you know, which is in your mouth. We still remember that. So that's all concepts. What I'm trying to say is all concepts need not have similar representations. Some concepts might have linguistic, some concepts might have pictorial, which is visual, sometimes auditory, sometimes tactile. Touch, we also remember different kinds of touch. Maybe a beating, maybe a fight in college, or maybe, you know, a warm touch in college. All of those are memories which are stored as concepts, but it might not have a word for it, or you might not even have a visual form for it, but still the category as a concept itself will remain in your memory, and it does for all of our memories. So every concept in essence can be represented using multiple senses, but the concept itself is an abstract entity, and we have a whole big network, multiple concepts related to multiple concepts, which constitute memory. That's one way, you know, to think about memory. And if that's your model of memory, that is called a semantic network, which you should remember. And this is also a reason why, if you have multiple representations in your learning phase, you find it difficult, because both really lead to the same node in the graph. All right, hope that helps some of you to start thinking. This is, oh, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I have a question that sometimes it happens that we meet a person for a brief amount of time, and suppose he's happy when we meet him, he's really, really happy and smiling and all. And after some time, not very long, we are asked to recognize whom we met, and we are given three faces. One is happy, one is angry, and one is sad. And we are only able to see that, yes, this happy face is the one I met, and we are not able to see that the angry and the sad faces are actually the same person with different emotion. So which process here of the brain is affected? Is it encoding, storage, or retrieval? Like, why are we not able to recognize the same person when the emotions are different? Because his features are still the same, right?
Yeah, very, very good. In fact, what you see on the screen actually has manipulated emotions in faces, taken from an experiment on facial emotion detection. So to answer your question, both the processes are affected. Memory is very, I mean, the encoding of memory is very contextual. So one of the, well, I mean, it's a classic experiment, although, well, let me just take it at face value and explain the experiment first. So what they did was they asked people to memorize a list of words. So for one group of people, they asked them to memorize a list of words standing on the beach. For the other set of participants, they were taken inside water, and they were asked to memorize the set of words inside water. That's the recognition, that's the encoding stage. So you have to memorize the words. Then for the testing phase, what they did was, for one group of people, they were tested in the same context in which they had to memorize it. So if they were asked to memorize on standing on a beach, they were also tested standing on the beach. For the other group of people, they flipped that. So if they had to memorize when they were underwater, they had to recall when they were brought back on the beach. It turns out that if the context between encoding and recall is same, then people perform better at the task compared to if we change the context between encoding and retrieval. That points out that the encoding, or rather the way memory operates, takes out a lot of contextual cues. So if, for example, you see a person in a happy face, happy emotion, it is more probable that you will recognize the same face in a happy emotion more compared to when you see the same face in some other emotion, because of the nature in which memory works. Encoding wise, because encoding is contextual, when I see a happy face, I'm going to encode a happy face. I'm not going to encode a face. Face is never neutral. In fact, we hardly see neutral faces. Well, even if we do, the probability of that is low. When we are recalling, a problem is there again, because now you have to go and search for a happy face, but now there is essentially no match with what you have at hand with the happy face, because now you have a sad face which you have to map with the happy face, which means now you have to retrieve the specific features of the face. And that's again another experimental evidence to show that we code faces as a whole. Because if we would have coded faces as parts, then emotion recognition is not a big problem for computers. But emotion recognition, if it's a flip-flop of emotion, then it is a problem for humans. Right? So it's happening because encoding itself is contextual. It's also happening because recall also is contextual. And it's also, as an experimental evidence shows, that we see faces as an overall gestalt, kind of a holistic image instead of different parts of it. Now, there are more complications. More recent research on emotions, especially faces, emotions in faces, show that we have initially it showed, or people believed, that we are more attentive to angry faces, because angry faces are something that we are really scared about and all. More recent research shows that that's wrong. We are actually more attentive to happy faces, and the memory for happy faces far exceeds the memory for angry faces or sad faces. Sad faces is worse. The emotion for happy faces is more. So happy as an emotion, or happy face as an emotion, has more value for us, both during recall and also for recognition. And that's why the memory for happy faces is going to be would be better than some other emotional face. So all of this comes together. So it's not one peculiar specific part. I'm sorry I give you a long story, but this is how the science is proceeded. And even if you cut all the brain talk, still just behaviorally, these are all the stuff that we already know.
Sir, is this the reason that we perceive the face as whole? Is this the reason why we are not able to differentiate animals? Like, if we see two zebras, we are not able to differentiate them, right? Is this why that happens?
Zebras is very difficult. I don't know. Um, I mean, if you have seen the movie Lion King, then you know that the visual distinction problem that was talked about by Leo. So you really you can't say this is the X zebra versus this is a Y zebra. We don't yet know how zebras are able to tell them apart. Penguins can, but penguins don't do that through visual discrimination task. Penguins do that through sound. So probably, when that is in nature, when things are very, very similar visually, then there are other modalities that are used to distinguish them, not vision. That possibility exists. So smell becomes another way rodents are able to distinguish each other. Even penguins do the same. So maybe even not just interspecies, even for the same species, it's probably a very difficult task to do visually. Right. So, but yeah, if you are doing, even if you are doing feature recognition, still to say which striped zebra is different from which striped zebra is very hard. That's why we have these decision aids. Even almost all forest departments, including the Indian forest department, uses it for counting of animals by stripes, not just for zebras, even for less slightly easier tasks like counting tigers, because tigers are not probably as similar as zebras are, but still people, we are very bad at judging visually discriminating objects if they are very similar to each other. We are bad at judgments of all kinds, but especially bad for visual judgments when they are overlapping with each other, which is why we need these decision aids. So we can't do the task. I mean, and yeah, you are in that way right, that probably that is because we are seeing them as one single zebra and we are not able to separate out the intricate changes between the different stripes, but we won't be able to do that anyway. And what I'm saying is probably the zebras also might find it hard to do it. We don't know. But we do know that many other species, especially when they are visually similar, use other senses to figure out who is whose, partner or child or parent and other relations.
So is it that because humans use all their senses, we are not able to judge properly because some animals are more focused on one particular sense, right? Like smell or hearing.
Yeah, but we do that pretty okay with humans. So this inter species comparison becomes very difficult. Think about the problems a human needs to solve in a human society. We are not supposed to stay with zebras, right? We are supposed to stay with humans. Now, do we have the ability to discriminate humans from faces? Decent enough ability. We might not be 100% right, but are we operating at an acceptable level? Let's say 70-80% correct responses.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, and remember that we don't really use all our senses. We don't taste or smell easily humans to discriminate. In fact, if you look at the human brain, the most developed area is for vision. And vision is our stronghold. So the most developed and most used sense among humans is indeed vision, which is also reciprocated by the maximum amount of brain matter which is devoted to processing visual stimuli. So if we are good at something, we are good at vision. Next comes auditory, slightly okay, not as good as vision. Then comes smell. We are actually very bad at smell, but still we are okay. We can somewhat have larger categories of smell, but we can't really separate different things out. So for us, all dog smells the same, right? So you can't really say which dog is what dog, for example. Then the later after that is taste. We really have a horrible sense of taste. I mean, typically we just have 4 or 5 categories of taste, and that's all it is. And even then, you can easily mess up one category by the other by just making something hot. If you have hot, you have killed all other tastes. And then it's tactile. Tactile also we have pretty bad ability to discriminate. So that again, you can do experiments by telling a person to close the eyes and keep on touching different areas on the hand and to say where he or she has been touched. People are not able to discriminate it within a few inches. So we really have a pretty shabby sense of most senses, but vision is something that we have got the best. And after that, auditory to a large extent, specifically because we use language which has both visual and auditory aspects to a very developed level. That's where we are really.
Sir, is this comparison between humans and other species, or is this comparison like we are comparing eyes with ears and tongue?
Oh, this is just between humans, which is the sense that we have the most.
Okay.
Yeah, you can of course then compare most of these senses with other species, at least mammalian species, because most other mammalian species also have the same 5 senses. I do not believe or don't talk about 6th sense. I think it's just voodoo. But for the 5 senses we have scientific evidence for. All right, so let me proceed. I think this was a very good discussion, but there's some more stuff I want to cover.
Sir?
Yeah,
Sir?
can we? Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
All right, sir. We can do it later.
Okay, yeah, let's move a little more and then we will talk. So how do you do this in a computer? And this is a typical example from neural network, if any of you either know or will know how that works. So this is a picture of one person X, and here we have the same thing. We have a picture and we have a label for that. And what the neural network, which is essentially modeled on how the human neuron works, and you want to say, okay, if the brain is able to learn different things, if the brain is able to extract different properties and and make global sense of that, let me build a computer model or a program that is also able to do the same. So what people did was they built what they called artificial neural networks. Artificial because it's artificial, neural because it's based on neurons in the head, and network because it has a new network-like structure where each unit is connected to each unit in different intricate ways. So the way to do that is you see or you feed this picture as an input, and from here you pick out you pick out 128 different measurements about all these discrete things that we were talking about or somebody was talking about, which has to do with feature analysis. So where is the ear, where is the eye, how much wrinkles are there, how much is the elevation of the nose, how much is the lips, and all whatever else you can extract from the face. It seems that there are 128 measurements that can be extracted. People have done that, and now I want to say, well, I'm feeding in different pictures, and here you have Will Ferrell, which is the same person, but showing different emotions, the same thing that we were explaining. So this picture of Will Ferrell also generates 128 measurements. This picture of Will Ferrell also generates 128 measurements by the neural network. And now we compare them. What will happen initially is that the computer is going to say, or the neural network is probably going to say, this is a different person, this is a different person. This is a different person. But what we want the program to say is these two are the same person. This is a different person. Remember, emotions are same. So Will Ferrell smiling, Chad Smith smiling. But the network has to say or conclude that they are different people because they are different people. Here is the same person, but you have different emotions. So initially the program is going to say they are different people, but we want the program to learn that they are the same person. And the way you do that is you typically tweak the what is called weights of the different networks, network weights, which is at the different edges of the network, to eventually come up to a solution where the program ends up saying this is person one, this is Chad Smith, this is Will Ferrell, this is Will Ferrell. And the idea is, if you are able to see how we had built a neural network that is able to recognize the same object, even though same face, even though it has the different emotions, and say it is different from another person who also has the same emotion, then probably that's also how we do in our head. But there are interesting things about it. There are also problems with this. The problem is we are not sure whether we take these 128 measurements in the brain. We may be. We are not sure. But what this neural network shows is if we would have taken all of these 128 measurements, in our head, we keep on rewiring our neural network, which is a biological neural network, for us to be able to make this judgment of how you can discount emotions in a face and still make the same judgment, oh, this is the same face. To be able to, how are we able to do that is what this neural network explicitly shows computationally, and we assume that probably this is also how the human does it. But the human may or may not actually do it in the same way. Okay, yeah, questions?
Sir, I have a question. In the previous discussion, that we are seeing that how we recognize a human differently and animals. So, sir, I have a question that suppose a man is living in a jungle since his childhood. So, after like say 30 years, would he recognize human properly or more properly the animals?
Yeah, so see, once you have more stimuli, this is more like more training data, right? So Yeah, sorry for the disruption. So yeah, it depends on the training set. If you provide a human with a lot of training data about animals and that person is staying within animals, then that person's ability to recognize animals will improve much more than if you bring a person from a city and be able to do that. And we have also a lot of ethnographic and anthropological evidence for that. Those who stay, in rural societies are able to, if you have, let's say, you're a farmer and you have 110 goats, you are able to say one goat from the other because that's the stimuli that you're exposed to every day. But I, for example, won't be able to recognize one goat versus the other because I'm not exposed to that every day. So, this really is a question about training. Similarly, if you look at workers working in different factories, they are able to say correct versus incorrect, correct versus incorrect, let's say, circuit boards or something of that sort, because they are at the task. Of course, if you go for the first time, you won't be able to do that.
So, sir, so this question, that person who lived in that, excuse me, sir, am I audible? Sir, you are not audible.
I'm sorry. So could you please repeat your question once more?
Yes, sir. I am saying that so the person like who live in the jungle for say 30 years and not with humans, he will be able to recognize like animals around him. But so my question is, if he living since starting in the jungle, so would he saw humans like we saw as animals? I mean.
Oh, so you're saying that is there any innate ability for us to, let's say, recognize human faces?
Yeah, yes, I'm saying that it is like a genetic, or we recognize is by training or something.
I don't know the correct answer. So there is one group of people who have claimed that we have an innate ability to recognize human faces, and in fact, we value human faces more than any other faces. If that's the case, then in your example, even if the person has been raised in a jungle, once that person shifts to society, that person should not have, well, he or she will have difficulty, but eventually would be able to overcome that difficulty and be able to recognize and separate out different human faces. The experimental evidence for that comes from studies with kids, where uh, just a few weeks born kids are also able to recognize the face of the mother, even if you turn it upside down, or the major caregiver, especially it's a woman most of the time, who is a major caregiver. Even if you rotate the face, or even if you change the face to upside down, the specific caregiver's face the baby is able to recognize, but not for any other faces. So there is some kind of overt valuation of human faces, even if in the brain there is a specific area called the fusiform gyrus, which is near your temporal lobe, which specifically gets activated for human faces. So people have used these two evidences to claim that there is a unique role and importance of faces, because we are very social in nature and we live in through social interactions. Over evolutionary time, we have developed higher value for human faces compared to other stimuli, and hence, if that's the case, then even if I have never been exposed to human faces, when I am exposed to human faces, I should be able to do a pretty good task, not as bad as not being able to say who is who. But that said, it is also culture specific. There is also other evidences which show that faces which are very difficult to recognize apart, say for example Chinese faces or Japanese faces or African faces, are very hard to recognize who is what for a non-native. So if, for example, I would do a face recognition memory task on Indians and I show Indian faces, the probability or the performance level is going to drop drastically if instead of Indian faces, I use, let's say, East African faces or um, mainland China faces or even Western Japanese faces. Um, so my personal take is that uh, faces obviously are very important because we have all these cultural and social interactions happening, and we did live like that for millions of years. But at the same time, there's also a lot of visual perception happening, which is not culture or society or any of that sort. And both of them are at play. And as I keep on repeating in my classes, at least, that you can't really separate out memory from perception, from cultural effects, from social effects, from evolution, from biology, because eventually when you're seeing a face, our brains really are working to recognize the face. It is theorists who say, oh, this is culture specific, or this is society specific, or this is visual perception, or this is memory based. But as a human, I'm just recognizing a face. So all different facets of the mind is coming together for me to be able to recognize a face. What we do know is what the behavioral data shows. And the data shows, yes, we do have a pretty good ability to recognize faces, but we fail when we are looking at faces from different cultures. That is not to say that culture has an effect on psychology, which obviously it does. It also is to say that facial perception itself is really a set of multiple things. It is a set of training, and that is why culture-specific faces are easier to recognize, because you are more exposed to culture-specific faces. As simple as that. So it has a huge amount of learning involved, or visual perception involved. But at the same time, probably because of our need to perceive faces a lot, we have a specific area dedicated for faces, or predominantly for faces in our brain. And we also have a processing effectivity for faces which are closer to where we live, which is our culture. So all these things I think are part of it. You should not well, that's how, at least how I think about it. Yeah. So again, I answered your question, but I also gave out more information. I hope that's useful.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. All right. So two more things I want to cover today. One is, memory itself can be of multiple kinds, and the most broad distinction, one of the most broad distinctions people have made, scholars have made previously, is between implicit versus explicit memory. So implicit memory is mainly to do with what you're not aware of, or what's not in your awareness. It's not to do with any specific tasks, because you have a whole lot of information fed to you at any instant of time, like right now. Explicit memory is things that you learn explicitly, and it also changes more than implicit. So, things that you learn automatically stays with you for a longer amount of time, but things that you learn explicitly fades away faster. So that's why the changes also happen faster. Now, for how do we know that there is both explicit and implicit memory? That we know from the studies on patients, because there are certain patients whose implicit memory is intact, but explicit memory is gone. There are certain other patients whose explicit memory is intact, but implicit memory is gone. And if you remember previous class, examples of implicit memory would be like tying your shoelace, walking, driving, also knowledge which is implicit. Some people have also talked about implicit memory to link with stereotypes of people, thinking like pink is always associated with women or girls, is an implicit memory that we might have, which is actually a stereotype of people. Explicit memory is more about facts, about propositions, about logic, about how the world is, what you learn as part of your formal training, what other people tell you, and stuff like that. How do you test it? Well, this is one classic example to test implicit memory. What is this word?
Food.
Okay, is there any other possibility? Now, how much time does it take for us to come up to knowing that this is food? Is it automatic? Is it immediate? Is it fast? Or it takes a lot of time to deliberate over it?
Then it's quite fast.
All right. So yes. So if you tell people to, to do this task on a computer, you can actually look at the reaction time. The time it takes to respond is called a reaction time. People are very, very fast at these tasks. And
Sir, this part we also do in the perception case, in the similarity and the continuity. Yeah, it is similar
absolutely,
to that on.
yeah, it is perception. I mean, this is part of Gestalt psychology, right? So that's why I was saying you can't separate out memory from perception. You can't separate out perception from attention. You can't separate out attention from memory. Your mind or your brain is one single thing. This whole categorization is a convenience of teaching and writing books and chapters. This is not how the brain works. Yeah, so you must, and this is one message. If you're getting the message well, I'm very glad. Here is perception, here is attention, here is memory, and specifically implicit memory. And we know that by the judgment that it took very less time to figure out that this is food. One more example, and this is another kind of task that people do to study implicit memory. So you are given some part of the word and you're asked to fill it out. Okay, the technical word for this is called priming, Priming, which are of two kinds. I will go to that slightly later. But what is this word?
Implies.
Impairs.
Import. Impulse.
Sir, how many words have to fill? How many letters?
The four ones that you see. Some answers coming in chat. Yes, go ahead. Yeah, wonderful. What more do we have? Okay. Implant, impairs, impulse, improve, impress, implies, impose, import, improve. Well, important, import. So important will not work because of the blanks. Very creative group, yeah. Thanks a lot for whole set of answers. All right, so let's get to the point that I wanted to show here. One is, yes, it is priming, but priming can be of two kinds, at least of two kinds. This is called supraliminal priming. Please remember, I know this is a very difficult word to remember, but supraminimal, and here the definition also I've written for your ease: facilitation of the ability to utilize missing information by activating memory. How were you able to say what this word is? Okay, that's what you have to think about. Not now. I will send it off as a memo that you have to write in your free time. But how were you able to come up with this set of words is the question. When I say how, you have to explain what probably is there stored in your memory. How probably is memory activated when I give a certain cue like this. And for now, you have to know that this kind of priming is called supraliminal priming, which is that you are completely aware because you are able to see IMP very vividly. You are not nauseating. You are not under drugs. You are not under dream. You are not, just awake from sleep. So you are perfectly in your senses. This is also there on the screen for a long time. So you're able to perceive it in its totality. And it is also staying there for enough amount of time for you to read it properly. If any of these things are not true, then you are not aware, which is called subliminal. Let me put the word. Subliminal priming means that you are not aware, but I can prime. I can just flash IMP, let's say for 100 milliseconds, and tell you to fill it up. that will be subliminal priming. If I keep IMP for a long time on the screen and you are seeing it perfectly with all in your full senses, then it is supraliminal priming. Both are priming, but one is supraliminal, one is subliminal. Sub means you are not completely aware of it. Supra means I'm completely aware of it. Okay, so I'll just conclude this thing. This is another real-life example of implicit memory, which is also called procedural memory. I have already talked about it in the last class, but this is completely based on motor coordination. And procedural memory is really an example of implicit memory. You are not able to spell out in detail. If I tell you, write an algorithm of how you will tie your shoelace, or write an algorithm of how you will change gears in a car, or write an algorithm about how you would walk, you might be able to do it after a lot of thinking, but clearly, as we discussed in the previous class, we don't seem to implement an algorithm when we actually do the task. In fact, if you start thinking about the task, as some of you already said, we fail at the task. So we have this set of procedures in our memory, and we are very good at implementing them based on motor coordination, which again is action and perception in a cycle through memory, or memory is a part of it. But it's implicit because we are not explicitly writing or thinking or talking about it. So procedural memory is another example of implicit memory in action while you are in a motor task. Well, I'll just stop here. I'll take off from here from the next class because otherwise I'll have to rush. Or maybe I can just finish this up quickly. Now, if you think of memory overall, there are at least 3 categorizations you can do about memory. One is called a sensory memory, which is very brief percept. So you are hearing my sound, or you're hearing a flash on the screen, or whatever, hitting your eye for a very small amount of time, maybe a few microseconds or probably a millisecond. That's what we are talked about, sensation and perception. So sensory memory is memory for a very brief percept, or the sensation that you're storing. A little more than that is called what we call primary memory, which is sometimes also called as short-term memory, which is a temporary storage of information currently that you're using, but it's not going to be there for more than a few seconds. And the third category of memory is secondary memory, or sometimes also called long-term memory, which, as the name says, is something that you hold for a longer amount of time. If you look at the computer organization work, they use exactly the same terminologies. So that's why I find it very interesting to bring this up when I'm teaching human memory. You see, computer memory also, we say it's primary memory and secondary memory. Primary memory of the computer is composed of ROM, which is read-only, and RAM, which is read and write. Here again, you can have SRAM, which is static, and DRAM, which is dynamic. ROM again can be of multiple kinds. ROM, I'm sure you all know, can't be erased very easily. You need to really bring it under an electrical circuitry to rewire that. But RAM you can erase and write pretty easily. But both are part of primary memory, and these are more long-term storage on secondary memory. So well, floppy drives are over, but hard drives or pen drives or DVDs are secondary memory. If you look at movement of information, here you have the CPU. This is more like cache memory. I try to think about cache memory more like our sensory memory. So you have a very brief and small amount of storage to tap the senses or the percept that is coming in. Then you move to your primary memory, which for us for humans it's short-term memory. And here you move to secondary memory, which for humans it's more like long-term memory. You move back and forth between primary and secondary memory, or short-term and long-term memory. You also back and forth between primary memory and cache memory. In computers, I think we move back and forth between sensory memory and short-term memory. It's hard to move between sensory memory to long-term memory. So that's why there is no arrow here. In computers, it's also probably not easy to do that in humans. But this is a computer model of how memory might be, how information between different kinds of memory might be moving. This is a human memory model, which was given by Atkinson and Shiffrin many years back, which is also called the 3-store model of memory. It's also the simplest one and most common to the computer one. And believe it or not, the time when this memory model was proposed by Atkinson and Shiffrin, that very much was similar to the work that was happening in computer science, in computer organization and computer memory, where they came up with this kind of a memory model for implementation in computer organization. And these guys came up with this kind of memory model. And many people who were working across disciplines. So there were psychologists who were borrowing things from computer science. There were computer scientists who was borrowing things from psychology. I hope that thing still continues, but it happens slightly less, I guess, nowadays, but it used to happen a lot in 50s and 60s and 70s. So this model essentially says that you have this environment and you have the senses coming in. You have what here they call the sensory memory, which consists of multiple registers, each for one single kind of senses. So you have visual register for visual memory, auditory for auditory memory, likewise for haptic memory. This then feeds to our short-term memory, which is a temporary storage, or sometimes also called temporary working memory, that moves back and forth between long-term memory, which is our permanent memory storage, and eventually we create a response, which is an action from the short-term memory. What happens in short-term memory is a whole series of a set of rehearsal processes, which helps us in retrieving. So the cognitive process here is more of a control that helps us rehearse information here. If enough rehearsal happens, then those things which are rehearsed enough move to long-term memory. Those things which are not rehearsed enough does not move to long-term memory. So this is the idea of learning here, or the control mechanisms that is part of short-term memory, according to Atkinson and Shiffrin model. It is called a three-store model because this is one store, sensory memory or sensory registers. This is a secondary store, which is short-term memory, and this is a third store, which is long-term memory. And you see how similar this looks like when you draw the computer organization between cache memory, primary memory, and secondary memory, which obviously is a very simplistic thing. Now you have, I mean, cache memory itself has undergone sea changes, but this is more like how things were in 1970s and 60s, and this also was developed in 1960s and 70s. So this is the kind of similarity I just wanted to point out. And please note that this is the start of a bunch of memory models that I will discuss. This is the simplest one, which is the three-store model given by Atkinson and Shiffrin. Three stores: sensory, short-term, long-term. All right, so I'll just stop here. If you have any questions, then I can take a couple of them.
Sir, so you are saying that in the short-term memory we rehearse the input again and again. Then if it is after rehearsing it for very long time, it is stored in the permanent memory. So, but sir, there are some moments which we do not rehearse again and again, but it just store in like in one shot in the permanent memory. So
No,
how can we define this?
Yes, very good point. So I am not saying that we rehearse and we move to long term. This is what Atkinson and Shiffrin said, right? So the point that you point out is one criticism of this model. Every model, is able to explain something and not able to explain something. So the thing that you point out of how certain kinds of senses immediately get stored to long-term memory without any rehearsal is very hard to explain using this model. And hence this model fails to explain the kind of phenomena that you are pointing out. There are other models, which we will see in later class, that tries to address this kind of a scenario also. But Atkinson Shiffrin's three-store memory model finds it very hard to explain that. In fact, the data on which this model was built was mainly about learning data, where string of digits or strings of words will be presented to people, and they will be told to mug it up, which is called rehearsal here, and then they will be tested. And from there, they came up with this kind of a memory model, which explains some amount of learning, but does not explain everything that we are able to do. Okay, so yeah, that's a very important point, and we'll see if later models are able to handle that, or we still don't have a good explanation for it.
Sir, I had a general question related to what we were doing in the beginning of this course in the scientific method. Like for any fact or idea that is taken as a scientific fact, lot of people have conducted research on the same thing, and then many of them, when they come with the same result, then they take it as a verified fact. So, but like if we, it could also be like one person came up with one result, but then many others later showed that it was actually wrong. So if we have to like for our research or purpose or anything, if we wanted to like see a paper, then how do we know which sources are credible and which paper is like a legitimate result.
Okay, yeah, you ask a very, very interesting question. All papers are credible if they are published in with high quality. What I mean by high quality, and this is my personal opinion, so don't take it as a universal opinion. My judgment of high quality is based on the peer group. Peer group means who is looking at my work. So what happens is we have a whole bunch of journals. Tomorrow you can start your journal. Tomorrow I can start my journal. Is it a good journal or not? That you or I should not decide. The readers and the whole scientific and academic community should decide whether it's a good journal. And that's not just true for psychology, that I'm saying for all of science. Now, what becomes a good journal is one which is read by the most invested and interesting people in the field. If people read a journal a lot, if good people, in the sense, those who are more invested, if they are the ones who are reading, then probably, and what you are saying in that paper, if it makes sense to many people, then probably people are going to cite it. Cite it means they are going to refer to your work when they are doing their own work. So automatically, papers which are in double quotes good journals, which means journals which have very high impact, and there are 2 or 3 quantitative metrics of impact. It's not subjective. I don't like subjective metrics personally. I believe in objective metrics all the time. There are 3 or 4 objective metrics because one single objective metric always is fraught with difficulties. So one objective metric says something, the other objective metric says something else. If we combine, then probably we are having a better model of objective value or objective quality. But there are, and they are in public domain, so it's not a secret. So every journal is ranked based on that objective metric in any field. So if you go and look at what are the journal rankings, that is in public domain for every single field, be it physics, be it psychology, be it chemistry and whatnot. Even smaller fields like behavioral science or behavioral economics, or let's say neurochemistry or neuropharmacology or behavioral finance, anything. Even smaller fields and larger fields, you will have this set of journals. Now, if a work is published in a good ranking journal based on these objective rankings, then it is credible. So credibility then is sanguine. If it is published on some random journal that nobody reads, or if it's published in a journal that people read but the world doesn't care about, then even credibility is questionable. But once credibility is established, that doesn't mean it's true. So I have a problem to think of scientific facts. I think it's more about propositions. And that's not just for psychology, for whole of science. So you find something, you say about it, or you talk about it, and I believe you if you are credible enough and you are in good circles or you're in good hands, and I believe you. That doesn't mean that the world is like that. Otherwise, we would never have had advancement in science. So just because somebody found something, it's credible, I trust it, but I again need to test it. And that testing result will show whether that lives up to scientific scrutiny. If it fails, then it's gone. If it passes, then I have more faith. That again does not mean it's absolutely true. If I again test, or some other person again tests, it again holds its the same result, I have even more faith. But it does not mean that it is the big truth. So that's how all science is. So at any instant of time, we have a set of knowledge around us, and some subset of that knowledge is credible knowledge with which we can work and say whatever we want to say. But that does not mean that that knowledge that we have right now is an absolute truth. That's why we have undergone so many large changes in thinking, even for things that people thought were sacrosanct, like physical movements of bodies, right? So that's how I think about science. Now, the ability to trust is based on how many times it has been tested. That's my way of trusting. And the technical word for that is replicability. If a scientific study is not yet replicable, I don't trust it. If the scientific study is published in a good journal, it is credible. But I never know whether they got it by chance. We have some results, which are statistical results, to show that it is not by chance, given a set of many different constraints. So you have some amount of trust. You don't have absolute trust. That's how you should think about science.
Okay, sir. So like if we have like any theory and we want to see whether that is true or false, then we'll have to then go through all the research papers that have been published related to that. So then in journals, credible journals, like, and then see that which are the which are the more what is is it more in support of that theory or more against it? Like we have to compare that.
Absolutely. So it's not a theory being true or false. Theory is by default true, but it's about whether the theory lives up to scientific scrutiny based on data. Because for me, data is supreme. Theory changes.
Okay. So like if some theory is like it's not clear, like it's like there are some research papers that have been shown it's against and there are some which are in favor, and like how will we keep track of that that what is the actual consensus?
Yeah, so that's where you become a scholar, and you can't do that for everything. The amount of work that gets done pragmatically, you can do it only for one thing on which you are working on, and that's what makes you an expert in that and not an expert in everything. It's hard because every single day there are papers being published.
Yes, sir.
But you know, when you think about theory, specifically for psychological theory, it has another problem, which is the well-definedness of it. And I personally feel it. That's why I'm sharing with it. I am not a defender of any discipline. I just say what I think it is. Right. So I don't carry a flag of psychology, for example. So one problem with psychological theories is that it does not define the terms and the methods and the measurements very well, or it didn't used to. So now people realize this problem, and now what we are required to do is spell out how exactly you are measuring something, and also spell out how somebody else is going to measure if that person wants to measure, and give out your own data. So if you are doing an experiment, you tell me how you have measured, let's say, rehearsal in this model. You have to tell me what is the data that you have used, and I, as a secondary experimenter, should use rehearsal in exactly the same way in the way you have used it. And if I want to look at your data. Who knows if you have cooked it up or if there's a mistake in your calculation. So this whole idea of making science open, or it's called the Open Science Foundation or Open Science Network, forces people now to make it explicit of what exactly are they measuring, what they have measured for public scrutiny. And that is one way we are improving the science. Because it cannot be hidden. It must be in public domain. The more and more journals across the world, especially the good ones, are doing it. Even the average ones are doing it, simply because everybody realized that we are in a crisis because we can't trust knowledge. And that's a huge problem, as exactly you are pointing out. How can we revive the trust? It is by redoing experiments. It is also by forcing the experimenters to spell out exactly what they mean by that, also to share their data. But all of that is not going to take away one problem from psychology, which is the words are ill-defined. What exactly is long-term memory? Is never clear. How long-term is something that you are asked? It's not clear. We need to do studies to explicitly say what do we mean by long in long-term memory. Other people have done work. So, for example, there was work given to a person who worked on shrimp memory, long-term shrimp memory, and because it was shrimps, he could exactly say how long a shrimp is going to remember something. But there are many things that we can't do on humans. We can't kill humans. We can't slice off the brain of humans. We can't force humans to very extraordinarily difficult conditions, which we can do with animals and insects and this, that. And that's why many people actually study these things in non-humans, which is also psychology. You can have psychology is not just human psychology, right? You can have a psychology of insects, you can have a psychology of animals, of birds, of mammalia, of ants, who knows what. The idea is we want to understand how the mind works. It could be your mind. Human is one kind of mind. Of course, the most complex one is what we are told. But that doesn't mean you can't study mind in other ways. You can study a computer mind. You can study a grasshopper mind. You can study a frog, a dog, whoever. And all of them probably have long-term memory. And you can study long-term memory that way also. So expanding horizons is another thing that's happening a lot in psychology. And holding on to the strength of the method, which I think flipped off in 90s a lot and 80s. People used to just write papers without really paying attention to these kinds of details, which is why we also have a whole lot of stuff that we can't trust. But it's reviving, and this is a whole movement across the world now. I think I got a little off the track, but I hope that's useful to know.
Sir, I had a question regarding memory, the short-term memory. Sir, so when we dream, we do it using our short-term memory, and we often forget about it after we are awake. But sir, why do I remember that there was some dream I had forgotten? Why is it not completely erased from my mind? If it is short-term memory, is there some component of long-term memory also intertwined in it or something?
I don't read or know brain research, dream research. So I mean, I don't want to give up a cooked up answer, but let me read about it. There's one person I know who does or has done dream research, and there are also books written about dream research, which I never read. So if you are interested, then I can point you to certain sources, but I personally cannot give this answer. I don't know.
Okay, sir. I thought it was something related to memory, so I just asked.
It is, but your question is very directed, and that's a very good question. What part of it is short term, or why is it that, essentially you're asking that the content of dream, whether it is stored and processed in short term or long term, and what is the stuff that we remember, and what's the stuff that we forget, which is a question about memory, but it's a pretty directed question which should have a scientific answer, which I do not know, is what I was trying to say.
Okay, sir.
All right, so I think we should stop now. It's we have offshoot at time. So see you again in the next class, and I'll post a memo today, and then please fill that up. Okay, guys, bye. See you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.